The Bills got some disappointing news on two new additions. They bring back Dane Jackson and sign Kendrick Green. We're going to break down all of that for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Well, folks, welcome in. We got a bunch of stuff to cover today. We'll start with Larry Ogunjobi and Michael Hoect. We found out that they are facing 6-game suspension, so we'll break that all down for you. Then we'll talk about the return of cornerback Dane Jackson. And then lastly, the Bills added offensive lineman Kendrick Green. He's very interesting. I look forward to breaking down him in the last segment today. But we start with the big news, and that is 2 new free agent additions, Larry Ogunjobi, Michael Hoect, are both facing 6-game suspensions due to performance-enhancing drugs. Not ideal. Now, both players are still signed. The Bills knew about Michael Hoect's situation, and I think there's less to be concerned about there. It's a 3-year contract. And Hoect explained that he trusted a trainer, got comfortable, didn't vet a supplement, boosted his T levels, and he's facing the suspension. For Larry Ogunjobi, the information came up after the Bills and Ogunjobi agreed to the contract. And then when he came into town to sign the deal, he explained the situation to Brandon Beane. They talked about it. They went through with the deal. Now, surely there's been an adjustment to the contract. We don't know specifically what that is. But that's a 1-year deal, and he's going to miss the first 6 games of the season. Larry explained that it was a tainted supplement. And then, of course, Beane, when explaining why he went through with the contract, discussed how, the defensive tackle market shifted. They thought they had their player they wanted, and, of course, they decided to move forward with the understanding that he's going to miss those first 6 games. It's disappointing news. These are new players. You're excited to get to know them during their introductory press conference, and this is your first impression. Now, I will say I've been following both of these players for a long time, and by every indication, they are A-plus dudes. They're not shooting up steroids. Let's not act like they are Jose Canseco. I feel like that's what a lot of the fallout discussion has led to, is people really going hard after these guys, and obviously they shouldn't have this situation, but just because it's performance-enhancing drugs doesn't mean they're shooting up steroids. Athletes take a lot of supplements. They weren't careful enough in vetting what was in them, and for that, they deserve blame. And obviously, it's going to cost this Bills team. Both players will miss until Week 7, which creates a very strange dynamic for this Bills team in getting ready for the season and, of course, the early part of the season. Now, both players get to have a normal offseason with the team. They'll be part of everything that happens. OTAs, training camp, preseason. And then once we get to week 1, they have to be away from the team for 4 weeks. After 4 weeks, they can come back around the team before they're eligible to play again in week 7. So that's helpful that they get like a 2-week ramp up. But they will not count against the initial roster. So the Bills won't have to play with less guys. They'll have a roster space. They'll have 2 roster spots that are available to them while those guys are suspended. But I do think this really creates a challenge because you're preparing for a season with a certain personnel expectation in your front seven that is materially different after 6 games. These are both guys that are expected to be meaningful additions that the team is counting on for this defensive front seven, but we're still kind of basically looking at the same group from last year, the same D-line mix from last year, minus Von Miller plus Joey Bosa. So I guess if there's your piece of information to take comfort in, you want to have these players and what they're supposed to be for the team for the duration of the year. But it's basically the same group, again, minus Von plus Bosa. And then I'm sure the Bills will draft a couple of defensive linemen high in the draft. I don't even think that if this wasn't the case with these two players, that would be any different. Ogunjobi 1-year deal. I'm sure they wanted to have some players under contract beyond this season. When I say this season, I mean 2025, that are not just Ed Oliver and Dwayne Carter, right? That's currently what is the case. So I still think no matter what, there's still a high pick coming at defensive tackle. And I'd say probably the same thing on the edge, where A.J. Epinesa is an expiring contract, and so is Joey Bosa. So you're still going to draft players high anyways. And I guess the good news is they're probably going to have to play a little bit earlier in the season. But again, you're still looking at a very similar defensive line mix as last year, which we all wanted to be upgraded, right? I'm not trying to make light of this, but it's that group minus Von Miller plus Bosa. I think it helps that these are defensive players. It's probably a lot more difficult to bring back offensive players. After missing 6 games, the offense probably finds some sort of rhythm that they like, and now you're trying to factor in a couple of new pieces. And so I think it is good that they're defensive players, and in particular, front seven players. But nothing about this is ideal. It's something the team has to deal with. And like I always say about injuries, nobody's going to sit around and feel sorry for the Bills. The first 6 games of the season count the same as any other games. So you just have to figure it out. That's what the NFL is. Like, what are your problems? Okay, cool. Figure it out. That's what the Bills have to do here with this situation. Now, I know there's a lot of questions about the contract piece. And I'll read to you what Greg Thompson of Cover One shared on X. Greg said that they're going to have a reduced salary due to suspended games, which comes off the player's cap charge now, which is $1 million for Hoecht, and we don't know on Ogunjobi yet because those terms of that deal have not been made publicly known. And there's a reduction in the prorated amount of 35% of their bonuses, which is given back as a cap credit at the end of the year to roll over into next season. For Michael Hoecht, that's around $470,000, and again, we don't know for Michael Hoecht. We don't know for Larry Ogunjobi. So that's not fun news, We're listening to Brandon Beane's press conference on Friday afternoon to kind of talk about the big waves of free agency, and he drops this on everybody, and it's disappointing to learn this, but obviously there's no choice but to figure it out. And the good news is that you have a lot of familiar players coming back on the defensive line, and I think it's, like I said, I think it is helpful that they are defensive players. But they're going to have to get onboarded and make the impact they're expected to make. And I think it's a lot more challenging after missing the first 6 weeks of the season. And you're kind of hoping, like as a defense, to be hitting your stride and finding your rhythm going into that middle part of the season. And those will be the first games that these players ever have for the team. So challenging dynamic for this Bills team to face early on, particularly with this defensive front seven. All right, on the other side of it, the Bills bring back Dane Jackson. We'll break that down for you here in just a moment. Be sure to stick with me. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. The insights are surprising. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. The convenience is off the charts. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And the collaboration is easy. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. All right, Dane Jackson is back. You kind of knew this was going to happen, right? Kind of felt like it was trending towards this. I think even if the Bills made a big ticket signing, like say they signed Paulson Adebo or Travarius Ward or DJ Reed or something like that, I bet you they still signed Dane Jackson. So Dane Jackson's back on a one-year deal, and we don't know the terms of the deal. I'd expect it to be pretty close to a minimum type contract. He's now 28 years old. He turns 29 in November. Of course, he spent his first 4 seasons in Buffalo after the Bills drafted him out of Pittsburgh. And then he left after the 2023 season. He spent 2024 in Carolina. In Buffalo, 52 games, 28 starts. So obviously a player with a good amount of familiarity with the Bills. And so he leaves for Carolina. They signed him to a 2-year, $8.5 million deal, and they released him after the 2024 season. With Carolina, he played in 9 games with 3 starts, and he was their starter, their intended starter at the beginning of the season, but then he had a significant hamstring injury that kept him out. He missed a bunch of time. Then Mike Jackson gets an opportunity to play and start, and they like Mike Jackson. He played, I guess, pretty well. They signed him to a 2-year, $10.5 million contract after the season. So it's him and J.C. Horn as their cornerbacks in Carolina. And I know that nobody's like overly excited about Dane Jackson coming back, but I encourage you to accept this player returning for what it is. We talked about this on the Friday episode to close last week, where I went through a bunch of different options for what the Bills could ultimately do at cornerback. And we focused in on a lot of different veterans that they could bring into the mix. And what it really comes down to is the Bills needed to establish a new floor for the position. Dane Jackson is not an ideal starter, right? That's not an ideal starter. But Dane Jackson is a perfectly fine depth corner that can spot start, which he did a ton of in Buffalo, 28 starts in 4 seasons, play special teams, which he's done a ton of in Buffalo, and give you depth. Newsflash, he's better than Kaiir Elam. I don't think that's even close to being a hot take. He's better than Kaiir Elam. I think you can be concerned about Dane Jackson's return if he winds up winning the job over whatever other options the Bills have in the mix. And I still think another veteran could be added. And very, very, very likely a high draft pick is going to come at cornerback. And maybe even the Bills will double dip in the draft at cornerback. But keep in mind, not every player in the NFL is a superstar. In fact, most of them aren't. There's far more role players and depth players on an NFL roster. And so some of the outrage about Dane Jackson coming back is not something I truly understand. And I think there's some criticism that people have towards like Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott that they bring players back, or, that they value familiarity. I also think that that's pretty normal. And we're 9 years into this thing. When was the last time the Bills were 9 years into a general manager? What, in the 90s? So you're more likely, when you have that type of tenure, to be in positions where guys are going to come back. No, I mean, Tom Donahoe and Doug Whaley, or what, Marv Levy in his 2 seasons, he didn't have time for this to happen. So it's like kind of some unfair criticism that they're bringing back players that are familiar. Why wouldn't you? If you're satisfied with what that player gives you in the role that you're bringing them back to fulfill, what's wrong with that? Brandon Beane came out and said after they signed Dane Jackson that they're thin at the position. He's not selling you on this being the answer. So be outraged and concerned if he's the answer. My expectation is that this is a depth corner, and that's a perfectly fine role for Dane Jackson in the NFL. He's proven that. So this cornerback need, I think, is something to talk about right now. Obviously, the Bills need a starting cornerback opposite of Christian Benford. But also they need to get some players on this team at corner that are signed beyond this year at cost-controlled deals, which takes us to the draft. Christian Benford, right? Obviously, we're hoping and expecting a contract extension with Christian Benford at some point. Brandon Beane was asked about this on Friday afternoon, and this is what he said, quote, "We've been able to get some extensions done. At the end of the day, we love Christian. I don't really get into negotiations. Love Christian. Excited he will be back this season, and we'll see how it works out now, later, or down the road to keep him here. You know what I've always said. We want to draft, develop, and re-sign our own. Excited he'll be here this year, especially since we are thin at the position right now." And so I know a lot of people heard those comments and had a level of concern about maybe where things are at with Christian Benford. And I think that's probably fair, especially when you kind of read into the body language there a little bit from Brandon Beane. And this was, of course, something that came up after he had to spill the beans on the Ogunjobi and Hoecht suspensions. And so it kind of felt like he was in a bit of a different like charisma and tone the entire time, because I think he had his tail tucked between his legs a little bit, having to share that information. It certainly doesn't look good on him that he's in that position. And so Beane has never been he's never really gotten into contract negotiation stuff through the media, but he will give you some insight. And I think maybe his tone was weird, but he still did say things like, "We love Christian, excited he'll be back." He said, "You know what we've always said, we want to draft, develop, and re-sign our own." Christian Benford would be everything you'd want to keep, right? I mean, obviously the performance level is terrific. Comfortably, I think, a top 5 corner over the last 2 seasons. But I mean, you get this guy in the 6th round out of a small school. He beats out your 1st round pick at the same position 3 years in a row. Everything about that is a player that you'd want to keep. I know some people bring up the injury component. I mean, I don't really know how to factor that in. I mean, you don't love that he's had a couple of concussions last year and a couple other things, a hand deal. But Dr. Kyle Trimble doesn't seem to have a level of concern that should impact, his long-term health. And so I hope that this will happen. Again, I didn't get the warm fuzzies. I'm with you. I didn't get the warm fuzzies listening to Brandon Beane talk about this, but it's not like what he said with James Cook. James Cook, he said, just because we're not on the same page today doesn't mean that we won't be in weeks or months. That wasn't quite the same type deal. And maybe that's a unique piece of, well, James Cook has publicly told us exactly what he's looking for. So we'll see how it goes. Maybe a little bit of concern there, but ultimately the Bills have some stuff to get done here at corner. They got to get this extension done with Christian Benford. And, they need to build upon this floor that they've now set with Dane Jackson being back. And I think the way that you do that is potentially another vet, but most importantly, a high draft pick and probably a double dip at the corner position in the 2025 NFL draft, which we will start to get into pretty soon here, where now that the team needs have really become into focus for where you think they're going to be in the draft, I'll really start to laser in, and we'll start to have some draft conversations here on this podcast. And on the Herd Mentality Substack, actually, this week, I'm going to do a 7-round mock draft that'll probably publish middle of the week. So be sure to check that out if you're part of the Herd Mentality Substack. All right, the Bills made an interesting addition to the offensive line, Kendrick Green. Definitely not a nothing signing. We'll talk about that here on the other side of it. Folks, be sure to stick with me. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I love to pick my favorites. I got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. Plus, you can stay in the action. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and it's easy and fast. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There is no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com. Get in on this deal. New customers, $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins, and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, so the Buffalo Bills added Kendrick Green. Let me tell you about this player. It's a one-year contract. We don't have the terms, but my expectation is that it would be a minimum type contract. Kendrick's 26. He turns 27 in December. I was a big fan of him. Was an all-state wrestler in high school, third-round pick out of Illinois by the Steelers. 6'2", 305 pounds. RAS score really good, 923 out of 10. So really good RAS score. And he started his NFL career with a lot of promise. He won the job for the Pittsburgh Steelers to start at center coming out of training camp. And his NFL debut was actually, do you remember the Bills' week 1 loss to the Steelers a few years ago? Yeah, that was his NFL debut. And then he starts 15 games as a rookie. He got injured at the very end of his rookie season. Then in 2020, the next year, I don't want to get I think it's 2022, his second season, they move him to guard, and he gets beat out by Kevin Dotson. And Kevin Dotson has since become one of the highest paid guards in the league. And then he spent the entire season, this entire second season, on the Steelers roster, but he was actually inactive the entire year. Then they trade him to the Texans, entering 2023 for a 6th-round pick. He became their starter at left guard, but then he had a meniscus tear in week 4. And then this past season with the Texans, he was a reserve. He started a couple of games. I know he at least started the Baltimore game because I watched that one already. And he got a lot of run against Kansas City, and I think a few other games he got a chance to come in and get some playing time. So far in his career, 267 snaps at left guard, 975 at center, 115 at right guard. So a guy that can play all 3 spots on the interior offensive line. Like I said about that Baltimore game, I went ahead and watched that, but I need to watch some more. But I'll have a film piece up in the Herd Mentality Substack this week. So make sure you're checking that out. There's a link in today's show notes to see the Herd Mentality Substack. Have a mock draft this week, 7-round Bills mock draft, and the film piece on Kendrick Green, plus any other players the Bills add. You'll get a film piece, and I got some big picture stuff I want to cover there as well in written form. But I watched the Baltimore game, and actually I thought there was some really good overall performance when it comes to the run game. Work to be done in pass protection. But I will say, Aaron Kromer's one heck of an offensive line coach. And this is definitely a depth addition, but there's certainly some upside here. Like I said, coming out of college, I was pretty high on him. I think I had a day 2 grade on him. I thought I saw an NFL starter in him. And 2 teams have validated that. He's won starting jobs for 2 teams. Now, he hasn't stuck, which is concerning, but this is definitely not like a nothing addition to the offensive line that's a camp body. I think he's got a chance to make some noise here. And I think the Bills have pretty good interior offensive line depth, although this guy comes in as like the most experienced interior offensive lineman that's not a starter on this team. I like Alec Anderson. I like Cedric Van Pran-Granger, and I like Tylen Grable. But I think when you start to look at this offensive line, particularly on the interior, beyond this season, you can see that there's some stuff the Bills got to get figured out. Connor McGovern and David Edwards are expiring contracts. Right now, they are in the last year of their deal with the Bills. I expect Connor McGovern to get re-signed, but it's worth noting he's an expiring contract. Then O'Cyrus Torrance, he's got 2 more years left on his rookie deal, but he is trending towards becoming a very expensive guard. Are you seeing the money that these guards are getting in free agency? Did you see what Aaron Banks got from the Green Bay Packers? I mean, O'Cyrus Torrance is going to be every bit of an $18 million plus a year guard. And with what the Bills are playing these tackles, what I think they're going to have to pay Connor McGovern, you probably have to ask yourself some questions. Not that I'm saying that Kendrick Green is coming in to take any of those jobs right now, but it's a worthwhile look at a young player, right? It's a very worthwhile look at a young player when you start to project some of that. Plus, I like Cedric Van Pran-Granger and Tylen Grable, but they haven't proven their versatility. Grable got reps in camp at guard, but we haven't really seen him play preseason snaps or any game snaps at guard. And Cedric Van Pran-Granger also has so far really kind of been a center only. And so I think this is really good. At a minimum, it's really good competition for those types of players. A guy that's come in and started close to 20 games in the NFL, that was a former reasonably high pick, that's shown some good things in the league, has a pretty good pedigree. At a minimum, it's a good competition to push those guys. And then, hey, you're getting a look at a player that's got some upside where you got a few questions, really at all three spots long-term. McGovern, Edwards, expiring contracts. Torrance, not an expiring contract, but he will in 2 years, and he's going to be really expensive. Really. Probably north of $20 million a year if he kind of just takes a couple of steps here and the market continues to go up. No doubt in my mind he pushes that. So I like how this player's added into this mix right now to kind of see, all right, let's get Aaron Kromer's hands on him. Let's see how he can perform, see how he can push this depth, and we'll see what type of impact he can make beyond that. And so I think this is a really good, worthwhile addition. I think the Brandon Beane really sensed that. To Josh Allen's first year. I think he's done a really good job of making sure that there's a lot of offensive line depth in the mix. Now, fortunately, the Bills have over the last 2 years really haven't had to use much of it, but law of averages suggests that could be concerning to rely on 3 straight completely healthy seasons, basically, from your offensive line. And so getting a look at a young player like this with upside, with an athletic ceiling is something that I think any team should support. So maybe you didn't love the PED suspensions. Maybe you're not happy that Dane Jackson's back, but can I sell you on a reasonably good interior offensive line addition? All right, folks, there you have it. Got a great week of content planned for you. We got herd mentality most likely on Tuesday, assuming that we don't get some crazy news. Then I have a guest lined up for Wednesday. I want to get some outside perspective on these Bills additions. And when I say outside perspective, I mean not just me telling you a bunch of stuff about these guys. I want to have a conversation with a guest that I respect a lot, their opinions on the NFL. And so we'll see what else the week brings us. We'll certainly start to have some draft conversations real soon. But the bottom line is make sure that you are subscribed. I'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.